Okay, I think we'll make a start. There might be some more people that will join us. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Heather Ritchie from Queen's University Belfast, and you'll recognise me from session 1. So I'm going to be taking over from moderating from Terry for the next couple of weeks. You'll see that I'm sporting a very fetching sling-to-dead bicycle accent during the week, so I can still talk and things. So we'll do the best to get through the next session. So welcome everybody to our 4th IPI Lunch and Learn CPD sessions on marine spatial planning. We are hitting our halfway point on our schedule, and we really hope that you've enjoyed the series so far. So today I'm joined by 2 speakers who I know a lot of you will be familiar with, and a slight change to our advertised schedule. I am delighted to say that we are joined by Karina Fitzgerald, Marine Planning Advisor for the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, and also Conor McCabe, who works in the International and Offshore Energy Division for the Department of Environment, Climate and Communication. So Karina will be discussing marine implementation and introducing designated maritime area plans, and Conor will then go on to introduce the South Coast DMAP in a little bit more detail. And again, I'd just like to reiterate our thanks to the IPI for the support that it's offered, and in particular to Sean and to Shelley for their admin advice and backup. We'd also like to thank the department for supporting this CPD series. And again, all the presentations will be available afterwards for viewing on the IPI website. And this has all been made possible by funding from the department to upgrade the website. This will be hopefully for ongoing training. It will be a resource that you can access, and we will have hopefully more training next year. Again, similar to the previous weeks, we're going to have each speaker will make their presentation in around sort of 25 to 30 minutes. Followed by a short question and answer session. And again, if you want to put your any questions into the chat box, and I'll pick these up at the end of the session and see if we can get through a couple of questions for each of the speakers. We will finish at 2:15 sharp. And just in previous weeks, a small evaluation survey will pop up in your browsers when you leave, and we'd appreciate any feedback you can give us. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker for today. So Karina is a planning advisor, as I said, for the department, and she works on marine planning policy and legislation. And prior to joining the department in 2021, she worked as a planner in the local authorities of Galway County Council, Wexford County Council, Dunleary Rathdown County Council and Wicklow County Council. She has a master's in regional and urban planning from University College Dublin and a BA in English and geography from NUI Maynooth. So Karina, when you're ready, I'll start my watch and I'll give you a little shout at 25 minutes if that's okay.
Thanks, Heather. Okay, I'm just going to share this now. Okay, I think we're good to go. So firstly, good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to thank the IPI for organising this series on marine planning. A lot of time and effort goes into running a series such as this, so it's very much appreciated by us in the department. I suppose our identity as a state is intrinsically linked to our maritime area, and our relationship with the maritime area is continually changing and evolving. And I think the reform of marine management is reflective of that. So the notable developments in the reform of marine management include the publication of the National Marine Planning Framework, the NMPF, and the enactment of the Maritime Area Planning Act. The MAP Act was enacted in December 2021 and is being commenced on a phased basis, allowing for the transition to the new regime from the system which operated under the Foreshore Act. The MAP Act establishes in law a new marine planning regime for the maritime area. It's a significant piece of legislation which will be a key enabler for decarbonisation of Ireland's energy sources and the development of offshore energy. So this next slide here shows the key elements of the MAP Act. So similar to what we have on land, the MAP Act provides for forward planning, for development management and enforcement. It differs in the sense that forward planning is delivered through marine spatial planning and therefore must comply with the MSP directive. In addition to planning permission, there are a limited number of activities which can be consented by way of a license from MARA. Such activities are listed in Schedule 7 of the MAP Act. And then, as Rory detailed last week, the new state consent for occupancy is the Maritime Area Consent, or a MAC. It enables MARA to manage the state's strategic asset, that is the maritime area, and ensure that it is occupied by appropriate persons that have the technical and financial capacity to carry out maritime activities. This slide here shows that there are 9 parts in total to the Maritime Area Planning Act, and most of these have now commenced. So this slide shows the different parts and when they commenced. So the Act was commenced on a phased basis, and this was necessary to facilitate the transition from the Foreshore Act. And as we can see, there are 2 remaining sections to be commenced. So we have Part 1, Section 6, which deals with the MPPS, and then we have Chapter 9 in Part 2, the Maritime Area Authorization Database, which also has to commence. So I think most of you will have seen this slide last week, because I think Rory used it to illustrate MARA's role, but it shows the various authorities that are operating the new marine planning system. MARA are essentially the gatekeepers to the maritime area. On board Pleanála and the coastal planning authorities then look after development management, and the Minister for Housing, Local Government and Heritage is the competent authority for marine spatial planning. And the Act provides that he can also designate additional public bodies to carry out this role subject to his approval. So I just included a slide here on marine spatial planning and I suppose what it's all about. So the MSP directive establishes a framework for marine spatial planning, and it was adopted in July 2014. The directive obliged all coastal member states to establish marine spatial plans by 2021. In response to this, the government published the National Marine Planning Framework, Ireland's National Marine Spatial Plan, in 2021. MSP is defined as in the directive as a process by which the relevant member states' authorities analyse and organise human activities in marine areas to achieve ecological, economic and social objectives. It's considered an effective and strategic tool to coordinate different activities at sea and prevent conflict over the use of maritime space. The directive provides a flexible framework, giving member states ample room to find the best solutions. It encourages states to increasingly leverage MSP as a tool for achieving the European Green Deal objectives of decarbonisation and biodiversity protection. It requires that all marine spatial plans should apply an ecosystem-based approach, with the aim of ensuring that the collective pressure of all activities is kept within the levels compatible with the achievement of good environmental status. So this slide just gives you an overview of the hierarchy of marine planning policy. First of all, we have the marine planning policy statement. Work is progressing on this at present. So it will sit at the top of the hierarchy, and it will be the first statutory marine planning policy statement. It will set out the government's principles and priorities for marine planning, and it will remain in place for a minimum of 3 years. And then next we have the National Marine Planning Framework. So the NMPF is Ireland's, as I said already, it's Ireland's Marine Spatial Plan, published in 2021. It includes a range of planning policy for the maritime area, and it is the critical basis for decision making for all maritime development applications. There are overarching marine planning policies grouped according to the 3 sustainable development pillars: social, environmental and economic. And then there's also a range of sectoral policies which relate to a range of maritime activities such as aquaculture, defence, energy, fisheries and so on. And you can go on to marineplan.ie to see where these policies apply to. So designated maritime area plans, I suppose these are a new concept in the MAP Act. Part 2, sections 20 to 29 of the MAP Act provide the legislative basis for designated maritime area plans. DMAPs are marine spatial plans that focus on specific maritime activities, so they can have a sectoral focus or they may have a multi-sectoral focus, and generally they will also have a defined geographic boundary. In order to prepare a DMAP, a public body must first be designated as a competent authority in accordance with Section 20 of the MAP Act. Once designated as a competent authority, public bodies, which may include the minister or a minister, a local authority or regional assembly or a state agency, they will be able to bring forward a proposal to prepare a DMAP for one or more such areas. The Minister for Housing, Local Government and Heritage, if satisfied that the proposal is in line with the objectives of the National Marine Planning Framework and meets the criteria in the MAP Act, can designate the public body as a competent authority to develop a DMAP. So DMAPs they're flexible forward planning and management tools. They will contribute to creating comprehensive framework for managing marine activities. They will expand upon the vision that's included in the NMPF, and they will also be required to add value to the NMPF. And this will be an important requirement in the justification for a DMAP. How does that DMAP add value to the NMPF? DMAPs will create a framework for consistent, transparent, sustainable and evidence-based decision making. So you'll see on marineplan.ie, we will be making more information available on marine spatial planning, particularly DMAPs, and this will include a video on the designation process, and we should have that up in the coming weeks, hopefully. So this slide illustrates that over time, the framework for marine planning will include a national marine spatial plan, and then hopefully a number of DMAPs also. So there could be DMAPs for a range of different sectors, including offshore renewable energy. You could have ones for sport and recreation. I think you're likely to see ones for aquaculture, maybe seafood. And then hopefully we will see in time multi-sectoral DMAPs prepared by the local authorities or the regional assemblies for their areas. So the next two slides I have here just give an overview of the DMAP process and just the key steps along the way. So there's 10 steps, I suppose, in all. The first is the public body is designated as a competent authority. Once designated, they go away and prepare a DMAP proposal, and this is submitted to the Minister for Housing for approval. If the Minister approves that, they can then publish the DMAP proposal on their website, and they also have to publish a public participation statement. They then take some time to prepare a draft DMAP, and this has to include an SEA and an AA. Sorry, now I think I've gone to the wrong slide. Sorry about that. So once the draft is prepared, there's a public consultation on the draft. Following that, the draft may be revised. It is then submitted to the Minister for Housing for a review, who will carry out an assessment to make sure that it is consistent with the objectives of the National Marine Planning Framework and with the MSP directive. Then, if approval is given by the Minister for Housing, the draft DMAP is laid before the Houses of the Oireachtas or the Coastal Planning Authority, whichever is relevant. And a DMAP shall not be made until a resolution approving the draft has been passed by either the Houses of the Oireachtas or the Coastal Planning Authority. And when I say there, whichever is relevant, a DMAP that extends, I suppose, up to the 3 nautical miles, the local authority area, can be approved by the Coastal Planning Authority, but any DMAP that goes beyond the 3 nautical miles must go before the Houses of the Oireachtas. In July of this year, the Minister for Housing, Local Government and Heritage designated the Minister for Environment, Climate and Communications as the competent authority for preparing DMAPs for offshore renewable energy. Soon after, the Minister for Environment submitted a proposal for the South Coast offshore renewable energy DMAP to the Minister for Housing for approval. This was assessed in accordance with the legislation and approved by the Minister. It enables the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications to commence work on the preparation of a draft DMAP, and Conor will speak further on this. So this slide is a screenshot from marineplan.ie, and it just shows the extent of the DMAP proposal there off the South Coast, and it also shows the maritime area consents. And I'm sorry now, it's probably too small for you to see, but you can go on to marineplan.ie and have a look at this, and you'll be able to see the maritime area consents that have been issued on the east and west coasts. In terms of public participation statements, I suppose this is also a new thing under the MAP Act. So the purpose of these is to ensure that the DMAP process is transparent and that all stakeholders understand how they can be involved in the DMAP process. We need to consider what is meant by employing effective engagement methods, And so while traditionally, you would have a newspaper notice and you'd put your documents on display, I think now we need to give more consideration as to what is the most effective way to engage your key stakeholders and the general public. So the PPS is published alongside the DMAP proposal, and it provides the relevant information on the opportunities to engage with the process. So the next few slides I have are on, I'm moving away now from marine spatial planning, but onto development management. So Part 8 of the MAP Act inserts Part 21 into the Planning and Development Act 2000. And there are 4 chapters within Part 21. So the first chapter includes general provisions, including that the functional area of the Coastal Planning Authority is extended out to 3 nautical miles, to include what's called the nearshore. And then it also provides that MARA is a prescribed body for maritime applications. The second chapter covers development in the nearshore. The third chapter covers other development in the maritime area, and that is development that goes directly to onboard planola. And then the fourth chapter includes provisions relating to the manner of application of certain provisions to the maritime area. And I suppose this is an important chapter, and it's relevant for development that goes to both the local authority and onboard planola. So where does the MAP Act apply? I think this slide was probably covered in previous presentations, but I've just included it again here. So the MAP Act applies to the area of the state extending from the high water of ordinary or medium tides to the sea to the outer limit of the continental shelf. And so within that area, you have the nearshore and then you have the outer maritime area. So the nearshore extends from the high water mark to 3 nautical miles. And then everything beyond the 3 nautical miles is considered the outer maritime area. This slide shows the boundary for the 3 nautical miles, that purple line there, and then it's compared with the old boundary, I suppose, in many ways, the 12 nautical mile limit, which was the outer limit of the Foreshore Act. So when you think about the MAP Act, so prior to the enactment of the MAP Act, we had the Foreshore Act, and the jurisdiction, I suppose, for that area was out to 12 nautical miles. And an important, I suppose, provision of the MAP Act is that it covers a much broader area, and it enables us to consent for applications beyond the 12 nautical miles. In terms of development that is submitted to the local authority, Section 280 provides that development that is located wholly in the nearshore area of that local authority, or development that is located partly in the nearshore area of that local authority or partly on land, should be submitted to the local authority. And then, as Rory pointed out last week, all development in the maritime area must have a MAC prior to entry. Section Planning and Development Act outlines what development should be submitted to onboard planola. I suppose I'd recommend that you read this in detail, because this is just a very brief overview of what's in it. But it does include development located wholly in the outer maritime area, development located in the outer maritime area, partly in the nearshore of one or more than one coastal planning authorities, and partly on land, development located wholly in the nearshore of more than one coastal planning authority. And I think that was a question last week. Development of a class within the 8th schedule in the maritime area. So that is, I suppose, it gives you a brief overview of the stuff that goes to onboard planola. And then I've just picked out a few provisions that are in Chapter 4 of Part 21 that I think are relevant and worth knowing about. So Section 308 of the Planning and Development Act, it disapplies a number of provisions in the Act for the maritime area. So I suppose of particular relevance include Part 2, so other than Sections 28, 29 and 30. So the provisions for development plans and local area plans are disapplied in the maritime area. The other provisions that are disapplied that are relevant are strategic infrastructure development. So, and then the other one there that I have picked out is Section 310. So when we consider proper planning and sustainable development in the maritime area, we are referring to marine spatial planning. And then when we consider the references to the principles of proper planning and sustainable development in the maritime area, we are referring to the objectives of marine spatial planning as set out in the MSP directive. And so I've just there finally included the objectives of marine spatial planning. So as you'll see, it includes that we have to consider the economic, social and environmental aspects to support sustainable development and growth in the maritime sector. And of course, all the time applying an ecosystem-based approach. So that's everything from me. You'll see there is our email address if you want to contact us about anything, and a link to marineplan.ie.
Fantastic, Karina. Thank you so much for that. That was wonderful. Really good to hear about the DMAP process there, and we'll look forward to seeing that video on the website very soon. Okay, so now I would like to pass to our second speaker. So while Conor's getting his slideshow ready, I'll just read a little bit of info about Conor. So Conor is a principal officer in the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications, and is the head of the International and Offshore Energy Division. This includes governance of Ireland's energy brief with the EU, UN and various other international forums and agencies, with responsibility for offshore wind interconnection, offshore grid policy and oversight of the offshore renewable energy spatial planning. So Conor, when you're ready, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Heather. Can you hear me okay? And can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yep, all I can see is my screen. So thanks very much. And thanks to Karina there. That was really great stuff. And I learned a lot out of that. So thank you. I just want to congratulate the IPI, first of all, to echo what Karina started with. It's really a great initiative, and it's really great to see MSP being embedded in such a way. And it's a great program. And best of luck with the rest of it. So I know Heather introduced me there to say that I'm talking about the South Coast DMAP, but I think I read in the programme I'm talking about a bit broader than that, the role of DEC in offshore renewable energy. So, but I will talk about the South Coast DMAP and happy to answer any questions about it. But just to give the broader context of what the department does here. Look, we agree targets for offshore renewable energy. We try to bring an evidence-based approach and the state's ability, not just their own ability, but the state's ability to deliver on those targets. And they're set against and by EU directives, the Programme for Government, CAP targets, and that feeds into our policies and measures that we set out to reach those targets. Then we also input and guide the National Environment and Climate Plan, which is currently being reviewed, and we'll have a new NECP next July. The CAP, the Climate Action Plan itself, the National Marine Planning Framework and the National Planning Framework. So we both feed into those processes and we're guided by them as well. Then to support investment and to bring certainty to areas like ORE, we work on policy statements to give a direction of travel. And I'll go into a couple of more of the policy statements throughout the presentation. And then we work with other departments or we lead on our own legislation to enshrine those kind of policies in legislation and really make that work. And a lot of legislation, as you would know, has been set out there by Karina and the MAP Act that we're using to roll out ORE, etc. Quite a new function for us now is forward planning. So forward planning for offshore renewable energy in the shape of DMAPs. We also run auctions to support ORE, so the ORES. And colleagues of mine run a cross-government offshore wind task force, and I'll show you a graph of that. And then there's a lot of international energy governance that we work with as well. So bodies like the EU, the NSEC, that's the North Seas Energy Cooperative, obviously the COP, which will be happening in Dubai in December, and probably more prominently for us, the International Energy Agency, who certainly over the last 18 months have really taken a prominent role. And our minister in Ireland are co-president of the IEA over the next 2 years. So it's a prominent agency and we have a prominent role. France is the other co-president, so we're forging links with France as well as other countries through that. And there's a lot more than that, but they're the main kind of things that keep us occupied on a day-to-day basis. So the policy context then for ORE and for the other two policies that I'll refer to is the NECP, the Programme for Government and the CAP, and that is demanding of us that we get up to 80% of renewable electricity on the grid by 2030. So we're just gone above 40% at the moment on average. So we have a bit of way to go. But from an ORE perspective, it's going to be a big step forward, and I'll show a graph in the next slide to show you exactly how that would work. So our target as set for us by government is 5 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, and then 2 gigawatts of floating wind, which may be used for green hydrogen and developed. So we want to kind of try and build two industries there at once. That's a floating wind industry and a green hydrogen industry in development, and that's a key phrase for me anyway, in development by 2030. The 5 gigs of offshore wind will mainly be delivered by fixed offshore turbines. So that's introduction of an industry that's already established in other countries. So it's not from a ground up approach, but for Ireland's context, it's brand new for all of us. So our longer term goals, 20 gigs by 2040, and then 37 gigawatts, at least 37 gigawatts by 2050, which, given the sea basin that we're in, the depth of our waters, will primarily be delivered by floating wind. But the overall aim of being carbon neutral by 2050, offshore wind will have a big role to play in that carbon neutrality goal. So how does it look at the moment? Well, right now, our renewable electricity sees about 1 gigawatt of solar, about 4.5 gigawatts of offshore wind, and about 6 turbines off the coast of Arklow, which on a good day deliver about 20 to 25 megawatts. So we've no real offshore wind industry to speak of at the moment. We've a lot in development. Our target of 2030 then we'll see a massive rise in solar to 8 gigawatts, which is looking good, actually. And onshore wind the same way. We're very good at this in Ireland. So 9 gigawatts is the target there for 2030. And then 5 gigawatts of offshore wind. But the capacity factor is really interesting, I think, on this. So solar gives about 12%. 35 then, but you can see that offshore wind is the big prize here. 45% upwards is really something else. Like, you really have to go to fossil fuels to kind of have a comparison, and even really it's nuclear, which comes in at around 90%, I think, capacity on a good day when all resources are like uranium and stuff are available. But in terms of renewables, offshore wind is the big kahuna. Okay, so there's three kind of policies to support offshore wind and offshore renewables, and that's the interconnector policy, and we've a brand new interconnector policy that was just released there in July. We have then a transmission policy, so how we bring energy in the shape of electricity from offshore wind farms, for instance, onto land and connect it to our own grid. And that transmission policy will be out next year, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. That's in development and it'll be subject to public consultation. We're working with EirGrid very closely on that one. Then the ORE policy to reach 5 gigawatts is our current kind of ORE policy. That came out around March, I think, and I'll come back to that in a couple of minutes, because I think from a planning perspective, that was a real game changer for Ireland, really. I was going to say for us, but really for Ireland. As I said, there's two kind of divisions, offshore wind divisions. There's my own, and then a colleague of mine, Robert McGuinness, who a lot of you will know, run an offshore wind energy program. And I'm just showing this graph because it kind of will demonstrate the amount of departments and bodies, and this is just some of them that are needed to get this industry up and running. So yes, we're kind of the lead one on deck, but without housing, power, DETI, transport, other bodies like that, it doesn't have a hope of working. You need ports, you need enterprise plans, you need planning, all working in the same way. And of course, the grid then has to work through AirGrid, and crew and AirGrid have a huge role to play in terms of how we manage that. So we've very much a program or project management approach to this, and you can see that's how it's all set out there under different various work streams with owners assigned across various government departments, and everybody from DEC to housing to higher education and transport are owners of those processes, and the rest of us either feed in or lead into those processes to deliver the ORE, the offshore wind program. So it's a really important kind of thing that happens kind of under the radar and in the background, but is driving the whole system, and is doing, I think it's working really, really well. So how are we going to deliver ORE? We'll do it in kind of 4+ phases. They work together, these phases, so it's not one after another. They're working in sequence, simultaneous policy development. So phase 1 plus phase 2 are our main focus at the moment. So phase 1 will be, and actually the map I'll show and the map Karina showed earlier on, phase 1 is largely based around maritime area consents that were given to projects last December. Those projects entered an auction. 4 projects came out of that auction successfully, and that's kind of there are phase 1 projects. Those 4 auction winners plus the 2 who didn't succeed in the auction but are still within the planning system. That's our phase 1. The auction procured about 3.1 gigawatts of offshore wind, and we're hopeful to see the results of that in terms of wind, in terms of deployment of those wind farms in 2028, thereabouts. Then phase 2, we launched in March, I think, of this year, and that kind of brought us into a plan-led system. I'll come back to that in a second, but that's where we're really using DMAPs to accelerate that and fill that gap between 3 gigawatts and 5 gigawatts. And the state are taking a leading role in that, both in terms of how we plan for these things, where they're sited, how the grid is built, things like that. Phase 3 will come next year, early next year, and that's around kind of igniting that new industry of floating wind, which is proving difficult in other countries to ignite as well. But we have some plans about how we can support that and really kind of hopefully get ahead of other countries and learn off those who are that little bit ahead of us. We'll also have a future framework policy coming out around March of next year. That will have an economic analysis and other ORE inputs, as we call them. So things we need to consider when creating longer term DMAPs, such as ports, population, ability to connect to grid, non-grid, all those, and then a technological roadmap to kind of support those things. So just a quick recap then on the phase 1. So yeah, so the community benefit thing would probably be the one I'd highlight here, really, because I've covered the others. The auction produced an outcome of 86 euro per megawatt hour, which was pretty brilliant, I have to say, compared across the rest of Europe and globally, which saw prices of about 200 megawatts per hour over the last 18 months or so. And the benefit fund then is about 24 million per project per annum into those communities that are around those projects. So the current status of the projects they're in pre-planning at the moment, and we'd hope to see some formal planning applications lodged by those projects early in the new year. And we're working with those projects now, obviously, to support them in any way we can to get them through and on to the next phase of planning. So phase 2 then, and I suppose I was thinking about how we develop policy, and one thing that policy needs to be agile. So things that happen around you, such as outbreak of war, energy security issues, all that, you need to be agile, and we're trying to do that with our policies. So I think certainly 12 months ago, the plan in DEC would have been that the plan-led system would have come post 2030, but things happen and you have to react. and we reacted by accelerating into that plan-led system. Now, there were other factors at play as well, but that was the main one, that we needed to kind of get these things through the system as quickly as we could. So we took that decision in March, government took that decision in March, and we are now in a plan-led system for offshore renewable energy. So all future development has to be located in a DMAP, which Karina has gone through earlier, and I don't intend to go through in the same detail she did. But needless to say, we work very closely with housing to make sure that we're kept honest by them. We have one DMAP in development at the moment. That's a South Coast DMAP. It's the first time any DMAP has been done in Ireland. So we're kind of learning as we're doing, while being guided by the framework that housing has provided for us in the guise of National Marine Planning Framework and the MAP Act. And indeed, just the interaction between the two departments has been a great guiding thing. So we have just finished our first public consultation on it. This featured workshops across the 3 counties that are covered by the DMAP, face-to-face, online, and a meeting with various marine stakeholders such as fishing bodies, things like that. We've learned a lot, and we'll be preparing our draft DMAP over the next few weeks, and we should have that probably, I'd say, close to Christmas. We'll be publishing that and then going out to a comprehensive public consultation after Christmas, which will include environmental assessments, SEA, AA, and with a view to having that to the Oireachtas in March, and it probably takes 6 weeks or so through the Oireachtas process that Karina has mentioned there. So I won't go through these because Karina has covered the DMAP already, but here's a kind of a closer in version of the DMAP proposal that Karina showed you on marineplan.ie. So MEC is now the competent authority for ORD DMAPs. This is our study area. We want to identify, our overall goal is to identify 900 sites that will deliver 900 megawatts essentially. So that'll either come in one site or 2 sites. And we will probably identify other sites as well within this, but that'll be for post phase 2 development. So we're currently refining this area based on data that we're gathering on the public consultation and on marine stakeholders' input as well. And we'll be in a good place to kind of have a smaller DMAP, if you like, a more refined one, and be able to identify that area or areas that we deem as suitable for the production of energy. It will, so this is basically saying what I just said there. So one of the main things we're considering at the moment, as well as about coexistence around other marine activities. So again, a lot of this stuff is new, but there's a lot of research out there that we can lean on and lean into, and we're learning a lot about these things. We're also just in constant discussions with national parks and with colleagues in marine environment, part of housing, around protected sites, both existing, both near-term and longer-term ones. And in fact, I'm very hopeful that the DMAP and what we're learning around the DMAP in terms of data will allow for new areas and new protected sites to be surfaced in anticipation of LPAs coming along over the next 12 to 18 months or so. And our statutory consultation will be happening in the next few weeks, as I mentioned. And there is a whole of government approach on this around those protected sites. And we work, again, very closely with EirGrid, because grid is key, and that initial energy park that we want to develop, that we want that to be grid connected and done properly. So this will be the first time EirGrid will have built out themselves into the offshore. So exciting times for them and for us. The next steps on that, we've public engagement, which was 9.5 weeks. Unfortunate title there, because it reminds you straight away of a Mickey Rourke film. And that public engagement has just completed. Throughout November, we'll draft up the DMAP and publish it, as I said, in December, and so on and so forth. I'm going to briefly now talk about the interconnector policy, because that's the other thing that's kind of at the forefront of our minds at the moment. And we've released a new interconnector policy. From a planning perspective, I think it's interesting because we've kind of bought in, as well we should have, into a forward plan, a state plan-led regime, and we've extended this into our interconnector policy as we have into offshore renewable energy, because we're big believers that look, wherever the generation happens, so too does the distribution. So rather than having a developer-led system, potentially putting interconnectors where we don't really want them, we've decided that we're going to build a system, and this has to be built yet, but we're going to build that system and develop that system whereby interconnectors will be where the state decide they are. And certainly there is room here for private developers to construct them and to lead on them, but so too will EirGrid be having a more prominent role in that, and indeed they are through the Celtic Interconnector that they're currently developing in conjunction with RTE, the French transmission service operator. I'll come back to that in a second. So the IC needs, the interconnection needs that we identified for strategic interconnection, so energy security really, and what's been signed up at European level through NSOE, and developing new energy relationships, which we want to do. So we're not just confined to GB, it'll also be with France, Spain, Belgium, and further afield by extension of that European grid. And then also to complement generation growth, because we want Ireland to be at the forefront of the offshore renewable energy kind of revolution that's taken place, and we want to be able to export those things. And right now, even though there's a lot of talk, and we are looking a lot at green hydrogen and ammonia and ways of transporting energy like that, really the only show in town right now are point-to-point interconnectors. So we want to kind of expand the fleet, if you like, of interconnectors in Ireland, and continue on to good work. So currently our interconnection, I think, stands, we've one interconnector with the UK market, that's about 500 megawatts. That's set to treble now by 2027 to 1700 megawatts, and we want to increase that further to just shy of 3,500 megawatts in the mid-2030s. So these things take a long time to build, so we have to plan a long time in advance. And right now, I think the Celtic Interconnector is probably the biggest infrastructure happening within the States. They're pretty big projects. That one costs about 1.6 billion in all, and that price is, given the way materials are working and all that, and inflation, is only going to go up. But we do need them from a security perspective and from an opportunity perspective. I won't dwell too much because I think my time is probably coming close. But I suppose we're developing policy around this. We try to kind of make a series of statements to explain why we're doing things, and I think we had about 11 for the interconnector policy. So we kind of have a template of how we're pushing policy at the moment, and you'll see that the phase 2 had a similar kind of template, a series of why we're doing these things and what we want to intend by them. So you'll see that we're looking to increase Ireland's interconnectivity with more capacity, more lines to more countries, to meet our own needs. And we're pretty ambitious in this. Like we're not aiming for the 15% that the EU are telling us. We want to exceed that, and I think we will in coming years, not in the not too distant future. We also want to integrate our forward planning with ORE forward planning, so it'll be a broader forward planning system, and that should also link in with the EU forward planning system, which is currently being reviewed, and we should see a new European network plan coming out in coming months, and we want to be part of that. We want to if we can, lead that, and ultimately the mechanism then is to align our generation and our distribution networks. So a pretty radical change in a short space of time, but I think anybody who's into planning and follows planning will understand why we're doing these things. The state should be leading out on these forward planning things, and from a development management perspective, having good forward plans in place, good structure, it really allows decision makers the bandwidth, I suppose, to know what we want, what government want, and hopefully to give us consents in the appropriate and proper manner. So anyway, I think I'll stop there, Heather, and let you back in. I don't know how long I've gone, but it feels like I've talk for a long time.
Do you know what? You've still time, but let's take some questions.